Hi.
Hi. Welcome. So, to introduce Charlie briefly, Charlie's originally from Chicago, but is based in Brooklyn, New York, and is a photographer and an art director. And started photography, I believe, while you were studying Japanese and Korean at University of Oxford, and also have a background in modern dance, I believe, as well. And Charlie is very active in the fashion photography world and is known for his fashion photography work. The project we are here to talk about is Charlie's latest book, Curst, published by SPBH Editions /Mac. This book is obviously engages heavily with the idea of AI, which has dominated conversations around images for some time now. Can you tell us, I guess, first of all, a little bit about the images that we're seeing, what we're looking at, how are these made?
Sure. First, for posterity, I broke my nose recently, so I have a black eye, and that, in case you're wondering. Just prefacing with that. So this work is entirely made through generative AI processes. This particular work is made with Midjourney, for the nerds out there who want to know that. And the reason I kind of ended up with that is I built my own models. I tried a bunch of other popularly available models, and I just found that the training data set here was most aligned with the kind of things that I was trying to communicate. And with this project, I was really kind of coming back to my sort of roots working with the body and kind of having a somatic practice as a dancer, which is kind of predates my life using photography and working with photographic imagery. And I kind of wanted to kind of sort of, come back to the body and looking at the body and seeing kind of having a bit of a more poetic approach to it. And I sort of landed on AI with that subject matter because there's a really interesting kind of tertiary relationship to kind of physical embodied reality with AI. Photography is sort of one step removed from reality where you're representing some kind of embodied situation. And the way that AI works is we're mostly using large language models, right? Where they take a lot of data and they kind of collate and sort of analogize that data to be able to create something. So they're sort of representing the representation of some kind of embodied information. And I thought that that's sort of the further removed from the kind of physical embodied world, the sort of more actually I felt was being revealed by the physical world, the kind of gaps in knowledge, the sort of mistakes that are sort of inherent, that are often critiqued about AI. I actually felt like those things were really instructive and were helping sort of kind of access a certain sort of fundamental expectation that we bring towards the body, and as a way to sort of look at the body through the inverse of the body was kind of the starting point with the sort of subject matter and context of the book.
And I guess, the question begs itself of why does it make sense to take this, therefore, AI-generated imagery and put it into book form?
Sure.
Where did this idea come to make a book out of this project?
Yeah, again, I think there's some kind of physical relationship there. A book is something that's very intimate. It's something you hold in touch. It has a certain relationship. It sits on your bookshelf and it kind of has a physical presence. So there's that relationship there to a kind of embodiment. Also, I think, there's a question of scale that is being asked with AI imagery. We're kind of deluged with imagery already, and then AI, the way we can produce it, it's non-physicalized. So although, we can talk about the energy consumption maybe later, that's not really addressed in my book, but, it doesn't really take a lot to make these images. You can kind of make 300 an hour or whatever. And so it felt to me like a very important strategy to just sort of hold it down, slow it down, see what was actually happening. There's a lot of discourse around what the technology means to society, kind of abstracted conversations around the technology, but actually what can the technology sort of do, what's its expressive potential is often lost in that conversation. And so I felt like kind of pushing it down and holding it in that way actually made a lot of sense. And also, its relationship to photographs and photographic imagery. I kind of wanted to appeal to the history and that kind of language that's already existing around photography to sort of force that conversation and that dialogue in a bit of a different way. We're really used to looking at them on the screen, which I think actually kind of moves the conversation in a different way. Also, what was really interesting about this book is I made this book over maybe the course of a year, and within that year period, the technology had changed already so much, and to the extent that some of the work that I made at the very beginning of this process, I kind of had to throw out because they almost aesthetically couldn't coexist. And there was something just really interesting about, it's as if we were making an analogy with photography, it's as if like 7 different kind of cameras had been invented from the beginning of the process. And so there was something interesting about trying to kind of contain this certain time period in image making. We've already as a culture really integrated the understanding of AI, how people reacted to AI images 1 year ago versus how they react to them now is already so different because as a culture we've sort of digested it in a certain way. And so there was something interesting about trying to sort of like apprehend a form that was evolving so quickly, and kind of, I'm really interested in the experience I think we're all having of the sort of like nostalgia for the present. Things are moving so fast that we can't even really be present. We're always sort of kind of anxiously projecting towards the future. So it felt important to sort of, I think a book kind of can hold something and contain it, and it sort of obviates those questions. It actually makes those questions less urgent and meaningful while also sort of being able to talk to them at the same time. So that was some of the motivations between really like making it a kind of old school object.
Yeah. It's interesting that you should refer to it as an old school object. I mean, but it's true that the book design is kind of the most traditional photo book form that you can imagine. There's nothing crazy going on here. If we might think of these images as often described as like crazy sort of futuristic technological elements, the book design is almost at the opposite end of that. I wanted to ask you as well, you wrote a really interesting essay in Art in America entitled
Okay.
You don't hate AI, you hate capitalism, and if that hasn't whetted your appetite, I don't know what will. And in this essay, there is a sentence that really intrigued me, which was, while photography represents what something is, AI represents how something works. And this I found a really intriguing idea. So could you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so I think basically the way that AI works, right, is it's sort of tried to configure aesthetics. It's tried to sort of make reality sort of, configurable. So when you type in a prompt where, let's say, I don't know, dog or something, what are we collectively thinking is a dog? What is the sort of average, most kind of doggy dog? What is the consensus view basically about like what a dog, I don't know why I'm picking dog as the example, but there you go. And so it's a little, and also then, if we move beyond that into the sort of like nitty gritty technical side of things, then how does a dog like react to light? How does a dog exist in space? How does it relate to other objects? What kind of space do we expect to see a dog in? There's a real kind of expansive scope that comes with that kind of configurability. Whereas, photography is really kind of confronting a real existing situation and sort of representing it writ large. AI is actually kind of trying to say, like, what are the relationships? How do they relate to, what do they do to each other? What relationships are kind of believable or sort of expectable and logical, and what are not? That's kind of what's happening in the sort of technical behind the scenes. And I think that's a really interesting way, because I actually think that's how we all look at pictures and how we actually also ascribe value to representational imagery, is we're kind of trying to draw those relationships. We're trying to cross-reference our own experience with the experience that we project onto other people or the situations that are being depicted. And AI is basically doing that same process, but in a kind of mathematical, programmatic, configured way. And so what is the relationship there? How do we kind of relate to that sort of configurability? When does it fail? And in what ways does it fail? Are really interesting things to look at. And so in a way, like I've kind of intimated before, I'm really interested in that failure. I feel like the gap that's produced there is so exciting.
And is that failure kind of what the title refers to? Where does this word
a little bit,
come
yeah.
in?
I mean, there's a bit of that. There's a lot of reasons why I landed with this title. The kind of immediate first reference that I was trying to draw is to this category of images called Curst images, which are sort of images that exist on the internet that just feel kind of haunted. They're kind of unexplainable. We don't know how they're made, who made them. They're these authorless things that sort of like exist in the corners of Tumblr or on like some weird Twitter thread. And they sort of circulate and they kind of pop up. Some of them are more popular than others, but they have this sort of, they have a similar feeling, I think, to what I was sort of gesturing towards in the imagery themselves. And I also kind of like that there's the Curst images are kind of the id of the internet, right? It's the sort of collective, we find them and they kind of boil up from the depths as this like cursed object. And that's kind of what I think AI generally does, is it's kind of, again, drawing from the id of the internet and giving us back, a lot of people complain about this sort of representational bias or whatever that's happening in AI. And I think we're like looking at ourselves and being like, oh, I don't want that part of myself to see light. I'm in therapy to like not have that being shown, And so that was kind of a little bit of a gesture I was making there with connecting them to this category of cursed imagery. Also, I think, there's an interesting kind of black box experience that's happening with AI, right? Where you have an input and then something happens and then you get an output. And even the engineers of the programs don't really know what's happening in that process. So there's this sort of like evocation of magic there. There's this sort of like expression of, and I feel like photography historically has had this too in the darkroom or whatever. There's this kind of experience of sort of conjuring something, which is just, again, kind of nodding to that sort of linkage there. I thought it was like a nice word to say. Mm-hmm. And also just people really, I was surprised to see how hated AI is. People are really combative about it. And so I just kind of cheekily wanted to be like, this is a cursed book, as if making a photographer.
Much to your publisher's delight.
Right, so.
There's another aspect of the work. I mean, Charlie is also known for his collaboration with his mother, and he's done a book in 2020 entitled Mom. And your mother appears in some of these images. And I guess this is something that struck me as well, is that, AI imagery seems to always be really distant from the personal. I mean, I suppose that's a natural thing, but I was curious about that aspect of why you decided to include her in this project.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in that sort of, again, the kind of gap between the sort of public and the personal, or the sort of like cliched, kind of generalized, abstracted thing, and the thing that's very situated, very embodied, very familiar, very personalized. Again, I kind of think looking at both spectrums of the binary is a way of kind of really apprehending the entire scope of the situation. You can kind of, if you kind of hold down the two ends of a binary, you're able to sort of transverse everything else that happens along that. So it felt really interesting to me, just as even like a conceptual and visual experiment, to see what would and I had a whole data set of imagery of my mom. I had kind of done kind of what AI was doing to my mom. I'd sort of created this sort of public, perception of my mom. People who have never met my mom, they know they've come up to her, they've recognized her. I've kind of crystallized.
I heard that some of them actually congratulate her on her self-portraits.
Yeah, exactly. They get confused and think that she's the author of the project. So again, there's also this weird confusion of author and subject that's happening there. Yeah, and it just felt like there was an interesting analogy, or like being able to get towards the same things I was getting towards with my mom through the inverse of it, by kind of depersonalizing, really making it kind of an objective, kind of removed situation. So I don't know, it's something that I'm still kind of thinking through and figuring out what that means, but there just seems to be a there that I'm chasing.
Mm. My last question before I hand it over to the audience is that, you're very active in the world of fashion photography, and I mean, at least from an outsider's perspective, which is mine, that could seem like an extremely rigid, codified world in terms of photographs and what we see. And I'm wondering how something like this is perceived in fashion. Do you think AI is something that fashion is embracing, or is this something that can only exist in the kind of art, the kind of vague art space?
Well, I've definitely done AI commissions. I've worked with fashion brands that are working with AI. The fashion brand that I am the art director for, we use AI very regularly, obviously. But it is contentious. I mean, fashion is very trend-oriented, right? If it's getting a lot of discussion and attention, the fashion world will try to figure it out and adopt it. So that's happened, you know, and that will, I think, continue to happen. It's a bit interesting because there has been a bit of a backlash or a bit of a pushback about using AI and what does it mean. And again, fashion is a very physical, very sort of embodied thing, and so the relationship between the digital and the embodied has always been a bit of an embattled thing that fashion has always kind of had a really weird relationship to, and I'm not sure fashion has really successfully crossed the divide into digital yet. I think fashion is still trying to figure that out and will be trying to figure that out. So I don't know. I mean, I have received a lot of, from my corner of the fashion world, they seem to be embracing it, but we shall see. I mean, it's tricky because there is that black box experience, as I was talking about, where it's really, you have to cede a certain level of control to the process, which I really loved. I really liked kind of coming with the sort of intention, a vague intention, and sort of seeing what happened through the process and how you can kind of hone something that you have little control over. But I think in a sort of more commercialized, industrialized space, you really need that kind of control, especially when there's like a market involved. And that, I think they haven't figured out how to accommodate that sort of chaotic factor that's inherent in the process. So.
Do we have any questions in the audience?
If no one has a question. A year is a long time to be working with Midjourney and then also like professionally working with it and on projects. What was your most surprising thing that you didn't anticipate, either about like the learning models or about what you became interested in, or there's a lot of questions of, you know, images that involve sexuality or identity, or, you know, after doing it, working with it so much, did you kind of arrive to a place where you're like, I'm not interested in that anymore. This is now what I want to try out, or that's a surprise that I didn't think that this is how it would learn, or this is where it would go?
I don't really know how to answer that question because I kind of feel like everything about it is like a surprise, which is why it's like so fun to use, and so I'm so motivated about it, is because it's constantly like consternating. You know, you're like, you do something, you think you figure it out, you have like a kind of recipe for what you're doing. Especially with this book, I really like worked through a lot and then figured out like, okay, this is the sort of emotional framework that I'm working with. This is the boundary of the project. This is what I'm trying to communicate. Okay, let's just do that. I figured out, and I've made 50 images that work for it. Surely making 20 more to fill out a book will be fine. And then it takes you like 8 months to make those 20 things. And you're like, wait, I thought you write like this, you put this kind of prompt in, and you get the thing, but it's not, you know. So I don't know. There's like there is a constant discovery process, which I think is also like why I came to photography too. It's like you have to sort of like live life and engage with some sort of reality that exists outside of it's external. There's a lack of control. There's a kind of chaos that you're trying to apprehend, and that's what keeps it exciting as a medium. And I think that's the same for AI. So I don't know. I mean.
And is it not also complicated by what you were saying before, which is the technology is not stable, it's constantly evolving, so by the time you've figured something out, it's become something else.
Yeah, like the technology itself is evolving, and also like I was sort of suggesting earlier too, like the cultural relationship to the technology is also evolving. You know, the antagonism about it has shifted maybe from like, is this creative, is this art, and now it's more like, are you gonna burn down the environment using it? You know, there's like different things that it means, and also people, as, you know, I think most of us who are kind of at all visually literate, we can identify an AI image now very easily, whereas maybe 8 months ago or a year ago, we would have been duped, so to speak, by the kind of imitation of AI. So what does it mean that we've sort of been able to sort of integrate it and filter it through culture in that way? How does that change how people look at it, what the meaning of it is? You know, now when we look at like a digital photo versus I don't know, an analog photo, what are the differences that we make? What is the meaning of that actual form? And I think there's some interesting thing that I'm trying to kind of figure out here, whereas like Midjourney version 5, what does that mean versus like Midjourney version 15 that's going to happen in a year? Like, are those going to actually have different social, cultural meanings? And if so, why? Like, where do those meanings and expectations that we ascribe to them come from? and how are we kind of complicit in sort of upholding and iterating those things?
Clearly, there's enough material for several more hours of conversation on this subject, but this is all we have time for. Are you going to be signing copies of the book?
At the booth. Okay, it's at the
now.
booth. Right now.
So you can find Charlie at the SPBH Mac booth in a few minutes and grill him on more of these aspects, including perhaps that question that you alluded to a couple of times around the environmental impacts, the sustainability, which I know you're well versed in.
That is the sort of like tricky, prickly part of AI that I haven't really settled myself on, and this idea of like, what's our kind of abstracted moral responsibility to the things that we do in the world? Big question. So you can ask me that at the signing, but you might not get a very satisfying answer.
Thank you so much, Charlie.